So recently, I made a video talking about the first part of the third season of Bridgerton and, well, people seem to enjoy it, so I figured, why not make some more? It's not really the type of content I'm usually making, but I enjoy the show quite a bit, so why the hell not? And so, the big takeaway, the big discussion point that I've come across out of Season 3, and when I say big, I mean by far the biggest. There has been a lot of various different discussion points, but this is the biggest one. The all-consuming discussion point that's provoked many flame wars in the places I frequent. And it surrounds the character of Penelope Featherington. And the discussion seems to be very hyper-focused on one particular part of her character. And that's whether she is a compelling protagonist, whether she's likable, whether all the things she's done are justified or no. And this usually centres around the decay of her relationship with Eloise Bridgerton and her writings as Lady Whistledown. Writings that can be at times inflammatory and somewhat predatory. Gossip that's capable of straight up ruining lives, and so I wanted to delve into the muck myself and try to puzzle out my own thoughts on the matter. Try to figure out where I stand on this issue because as of right now, it's a rather contentious topic. It seems that either people love her and think she did everything right, or they hate her with a passion and think she's a terrible character, a terrible friend, a terrible person, and there's very little nuance in this. Not all that many people seem willing to place themselves somewhere in the middle. But since I am a perennial fence-sitter, I suspect I may, indeed, land somewhere in the middle on this issue, but first we must explore. Let's get going, shall we? Okay, so we're first introduced to the character of Penelope all the way back during Season 1, and I think she comes across as deeply, deeply sympathetic. Like from the beginning, she has it rough. All throughout Season 1, we see that her family, they're sort of looked down upon. Her mum is extremely domineering. She controls the daughter's style, dressing them in colours and styles that are unflattering and somewhat garish. Her sisters, you'd think would be her allies in all this, but no, they too look down on her and mock her. She has no suitors at all, she's a perennial wallflower in the ton, and on top of that she has no money it seems to recommend her because her dad is a fool and a gambler. Like to the point of destitution, I guess. Or rather, genteel poverty, because let's be real, they were never going to be out on the streets, but they probably would have ended up like, I don't know, Miss Bates from Emma or Mrs. Dashwood from Sense and Sensibility, living in comfort, but not the trappings of the high life they had before. But much better off than the working classes. But yeah, if you thought Mr. Bennet from Pride and Prejudice was a poor father for his financial foolishness, never saving money, never putting it aside for his daughter's dowries, well, Lord Featherington is even worse, because he's pissed their fortune away on his vices. And now the debtors are coming calling. And doesn't also seem like he was a particularly warm or kind father either, as his daughters don't even seem to care when he dies. Like, is he ever mentioned again after Season 1 at all, ever? Edmund is. So not exactly a picture of a happy family right there. So we have this girl, her family belittles or ignores her, the ton ignores her, and sometimes outright mocks her, and she has a grand total of one friend. One, and that is Eloise. And even then, it must hurt that her friend, when she comes out, despite having a bit of a disdain for high society, is wildly popular with the men. She has lots of suitors. And yet, the only person who wants to dance with Penelope at parties and balls and assemblies is Colin Bridgerton, Eloise's older brother and the third son of the Bridgerton family. And it seems like in those early days he's merely doing so from a place of friendship. Maybe there's romantic undertones, but that's for the audience. None of the characters in the world feel those vibes whatsoever. So pretty much her life is trash compared to her peers. She's running out of money, she has no prospects on the horizon, and the guy she loves is only being nice to her by dancing with her, which would be even more demoralizing, I'm sure. A pity dance. Whew, it ain't looking good. And what's worse, her cousin, I think, turns up at their home for the season, pregnant with some random dude's baby. And he's dead, so now the family is facing scandal. And in all honesty, yes, it would be the whole family facing scandal, because these things always seem to rub off on whole families. I mean, think about actual works from the time period, stuff like Pride and Prejudice. Lizzie is in a major panic because her sister openly runs off with Wickham when there's no evidence of them getting married. And she, a contemporary person from that time, believes that it would taint the whole family and make the rest of the sisters unmarriable. I guess from the perspective of, well, if one of them is like that, they must all be like that. Lack of sophistication, lack of breeding, etc., etc. It's all pretty backwards, but, you know, that seems to be the idea behind it. And so, Marina tries to go and hoodwink Colin. Not just any random dude, but Colin. So, a very, very rich person who Penelope loves, and whose family she cares deeply for. But not only that, she tries to do so when she'd already had the opportunity to marry that other guy, Philip with his nice plants, the brother of baby daddy. Honestly, maybe she should have written him a letter saying she's changed her mind, but she doesn't. She tries to hook the big fish. And yeah, I know being a woman sucks in this time period, I get it. I'm not trying to hate on Marina too hard here, but I think this is where the first inklings of disdain for Penelope's character came into the picture from the fandom. She outs Marina and collapses her scheme. And this forces Marina to marry Philip in the end. She has no other options. But It's not like she's out on the streets either. She's still in the top 1%. She's still ludicrously rich. She has servants, a massive house, land. She ain't struggling to make ends meet, that's what I'm saying. Penelope did not ruin her life. But I think the fandom got this vibe of her being tainted, being jealous and vindictive and whatever. And perhaps that is part of it, but also, I think she just cares about the Bridgerton family, and I'm not really sure she'd be willing to let any of the Bridgerton brothers marry her, knowing that she'd be lying about it being their baby. So whilst there is that, there's this emotional element of her loving Colin and not wanting to lose him, there is also, in my opinion, the bigger element of thinking that what she was doing was wrong. That's how I've always taken it. In my eyes, yeah, she did the right thing here. It all ended up for the best. Honestly, I think the worst thing she does in season 1, and beyond really, is weaponize what can often be at times cruel gossip to her own financial gain, not even sparing people she's supposedly close to. She writes about the Bridgertons after all, in depth. Daphne, Anthony, nothing perhaps as bad as the Marina expose, but it can't be nice being gossiped about. And at the same time, one, her family's in financial strife, so having her own nest egg to fund her future is a damn smart play. Nobody else is going to fund her lifestyle. It can set her up for the future. And two, all of the stuff she says in her little rag sheet, it's stuff she's hearing at balls and whatnot. It's not like she's a modern dirt sheet writer going through people's bins, breaking into their homes, snapping inconvenient photos of them in private settings. The reality is, what she's doing is simply monetizing gossip that's already gone through the ton. People have already been talking about it on the hush, at balls, at dinners, at whatevers.
I'm having such fun.
And she hears it. So people already knew this is just bringing it into the open and giving the ton a fresh discussion piece. And that's not exactly the best, but at the same time, I think a bit of grace has to be given to the character. This is not a modern day person who has options that don't exploit others. You have to take these characters in a vacuum. And in my eyes, she really does have no other options. Her dad squandered their fortune. She has 0 suitors. At least her sister gets 1 guy, but not her. And for me, that excuse holds very well throughout season 1. Yes, the job is very grubby. But considering all the main characters in the show maintain their fortunes by 1, exploiting tenant farmers, and 2, working servants to the bone to cook, clean, and otherwise do tasks not fit for aristocrats, I don't really care that much. Being in that lifestyle in that day and age pretty much guarantees you're living the high life at the expense of somebody else, so tough luck. That's my POV. And it doesn't really get murky to me until season 2. I enjoy that she shit talks the Queen. I enjoy she makes fun of her, because whilst the Queen is funny and all, she's also not a very nice person. Come on. Royalty is sitting atop that pyramid of exploitation, and just in general, she's also just a bully. And so for me, where it gets murky, and I think for everybody, where the fandom most heavily split in two was the whole showdown with Eloise at the end of season 2. Now, the main bone of contention here is that 1, Eloise discovers that Penelope was Lady Whistledown. She's been hunting her since season 1. And 2, Lady Whistledown pretty much wrote a hit piece on Eloise at the end of the season in order to shift the Queen's suspicion as to the identity of Lady Whistledown away from Eloise and prevent her facing consequences from that, whilst also avoiding having to fess up. And at the same time, it also prevents the wider ton discovering that Eloise has been having private meetings with Theo, a working class lad working in a print shop. If the Queen had kept digging and found that, my god, it would have been bad. And so Penelope saves the day by revealing that Eloise had been associating with political radicals, which ruins her reputation in the ton. Because you'd have to assume that most of them would be leaning conservative, right? Because who would want to change things when you have it this good? So this is one of those instances where it was indeed morally grey. Penelope has 2 main options aside from what she did. What she did originally is just rather brutally smear her friend Eloise in order to throw the Queen off the scent. But she could have admitted to being Lady Whistledown to the Queen, which would harm her future prospects and leave her with the option of either being the mouthpiece of the Queen in terms of gossip, or refusing and being unmasked by the Queen and having her work to ruin her family like she threatened Eloise with. So her sisters would be scandalised, their prospects derailed, that betrothal would be done and dusted, and it would be pretty much game over for all of them. Either that or she works with the Queen and becomes state media, which is, also not great. Ruins her integrity. Shit options. So whilst it was selfish to not own up, I get that. It is very selfish. It's also a shades of grey situation. Her family would literally never bounce back from this. But, hard to say it, but the Bridgertons are ludicrously rich. Colin pisses off on grand tours every year, it seems, on his brother's expense. Anthony bribes the art school casually to let Benedict in. They clearly have big dowries for the sisters, hence why their suitors are all big-time names in the ton. There's no misters here, only lords. Because the Bridgertons have money. Now they want prestige. They want all the daughters to be ladies. Plus, Anthony's rich enough that he can marry a nobody, an absolute nobody like Kate. Not to be harsh and rude, but that is what she is in relative terms to the people in this world. On top of that, she has no dowry to speak of. And yet, He's not fazed, it doesn't matter. He's not one of those lords who needs to keep marrying rich people to keep the family estate afloat. The dude's investments have clearly paid off. And so I think it's fair to say that the Bridgertons would bounce back. In fact, by season 3, nobody seems to give a shit at all. That's the power of money and prestige. But do you reckon the Featheringtons would get such grace? I doubt it. So for me, there's no way for Penelope to go that doesn't damage somebody. It's just a question. Does she kill her business or ruin the integrity of the business, and also potentially do irreparable damage to her family? Or does she briefly damage the rep of a big-name family that will easily bounce back in a number of months as the next season approaches because everybody wants a slice of that sweet Viscount cash? Seriously. I suspect Anthony might be one of the richest men in Regency novels.
My God, you're greasy.
And so in the end, Penelope did what she had to do. So I get it. It's not the greatest thing to do, and I understand Eloise's perspective here. Because why should she have to remain friends with somebody who betrayed her so thoroughly? I get it, and I would probably do the exact same thing. It's understandable why she'd cut her off. Why she'd be so massively angry. And the thing she says to her at the end of season 2, I can look past that. Because she's pissed. From Eloise's perspective, her life is over now. But that being said, I get where Penelope's coming from. I don't get the hate. Like, yes, she did some shitty things, but there are far, far worse characters. I mean, Colin. He literally visits brothels all the time. Not to shame that, but Georgian brothels are famous for their STIs. I've read something like 1 in 5 people in London in this day and age had syphilis or something. And I think the stats would be skewed higher towards prostitutes having STIs. So these lordly dudes visiting prostitutes are probably going to get STIs. And bro's going to bring that into their household. Certainly she isn't. So yeesh, he could be spreading that. And so, yeah, she's a great character, but I swear some people out here act like she's Satan herself, when in reality, there's so many characters, even in the show itself, that do way worse shit and get no sort of reckoning from the fans. They just smile and wave. Oh my God, he's so dreamy and handsome. Nah, Penelope's fine. She's not a perfect character, she's flawed, but I like flawed characters. They're more realistic and they're far less boring. Who the hell wants to watch a paragon of virtue just do everything right every single time? And so yeah, I think the hate is odd, because I find her very compelling and very interesting. And so with all that being said, that's the end of the video, and I would like to remind you these have just been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think of Penelope Featherington? Do you like her, hate her? You agree with me? Maybe not? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.